In this video, we're going to demonstrate how to paint an eye influenced by the artist Rene Magritte. Materials needed for this lesson are a selection of paints. Here I'm using acrylic paints, but poster paints will do fine. If you don't have either of those, then watercolours would suffice, but ideally the thicker the better. The colours you will need to mix the skin tone is white, red, yellow and dark brown. And then to mix up the sky, we will use blue and white, and then you can always mix those together to create light tints. Not forgetting a touch of black as well for the pupil of the eye, and then maybe to fill in a little bit more of the depth of the shadow. You will also need your sketch from last lesson. In last lesson we did the sketch of the Magritte eye. If you have not done that, then you will need a CD or something round to draw around, and you will need a box of tissues, 2 different sized paintbrush, one with a fine tip and one with a flat head, 1 pencil, 1 cup of water and an eraser. Step 1 is to take a CD and draw around the inside and outside. This is going to be the basis of the shape for the inside of the eye. Then you're going to mix a little bit of white and blue to create a blue tint that resembles the same colour sky as in Magritte. Make sure that you paint from left to right in confident sweeping brush strokes. You can see from this picture that we can still see the pencil lines underneath the painting. This is because we haven't added too much thick paint, and we've also added a little bit of water to dilute the consistency. I've also added a little bit more dark blue here, and then I'm going to merge the dark blue into the light blue using a bit more water with my paintbrush, as you can see here. Once the background is dry, take a tissue, scrunch it into a ball, and you're going to dip that in some white acrylic paint. Make sure you take off some of the excess on a white piece of paper, and then start to dab very lightly the background where your clouds would be, making sure that they resemble a similar shape to the one shown here in the Magritte painting. To give my clouds some more definition, I'm using a thin tipped paintbrush here, and then just giving it a little bit more shape on the top so that it's not so blurry. You can notice here that there is some form of perspective as well, where the clouds are larger, the ones that are closest to us, and then as they drift off towards the background, the clouds are much smaller. Prepare your paper, rub out or erase any lines that you are not happy with. Take the Rene Magritte image in front of you with the false mirror, and we're going to start mixing up a underpainting colour. An underpainting is intended to be painted over, but it sets the tone of the painting. So here I'm just using a little bit of red, a little bit of yellow and white, and then I'm going to cover the background, let that dry, and then we'll work up in different layers over the top to give the painting different dimensions. After painting the underpainting for the skin tone, we're going to just take some regular white paint and paint where the eyeball is. Even though the paper is white, it still gives a nice texture to the painting and creates a more professional look. After this, I decide to add a bit of dark brown to my original underpainting colour. Then I create a sweeping motion underneath the eyelid to give some shadow and definition. And I'll do the same thing on the top of the eyelid as well, where you see the darkened points. Do take on board that it's very important to test your colours and shades and tones on a separate piece of paper before you apply it to your painting. That way you reduce the likelihood of making mistakes. Next I'm going to move on to the warmer tones in the eye image here by adding a little red to my dark brown and a little bit of white, and testing that colour that I'm happy with it before I apply it. Now I'm just going to use a thicker brush to cover the background area where we see that warmer brown tone in the shadow. Next I will mix up a bit of white to give some highlight to the top of the eyelid. If you look at the image reference here, you will see this part is lighter, and that's what I'm trying to achieve. Then you can see towards the right side of the eye that the shadow really kicks in and it gets a lot darker. So I'm just giving some lower value by adding dark brown to those points of the picture. Next here I'm working in with the brown again, and those deeper, darker tones with the dark brown, and then I'm giving some emphasis to where the nose shadow would be, to the left of the picture. That is what that big brown curve is. And then I'm just continuing to mix and observe and try to replicate where I see the darker points by adding deep browns and also the right type of skin tones through mixing up and blending water into my paint colours. Here on the lid as well, there's quite a lot of highlights, so I'm adding white there just to make that show up, and then touches of yellow and again white just to kind of give a little bit more depth and interest to the painting. The next part of the painting is a vital skill to learn, and it's all about learning to paint what you see, not painting what you imagine. Now when you look at this reference image from Rene Magritte, you will notice that the eyeball itself is actually almost dark brown going into grey and a light blue. So just see what I'm doing here. I'm mixing up the colours that I'm seeing on the right corner of the eyeball, and we are replicating those exactly as we see them. Don't forget to add water to your paintbrush to blend your colours together to avoid any harsh lines between colours. Here I start on the inner corner of the eye called the tear duct, and I'm mixing a touch of red to a bit of white and a little bit of yellow, and before again we put that onto the painting and test it on our testing paper. Throughout the painting as well, I quite like that warmth, so I do add that little bit on the skin tone, and just trying to here replicate the shapes that I'm looking at. There is also quite a harsh highlight, almost reflection, where the watery part of the tear duct is, so I leave that part white. You will also notice that on the left side of the eyeball there is almost some grey, yellowish sort of colour, so I try to mix that up as well and get it as close to the picture that I can. With a very thin paintbrush I add a very slight touch of black, only where the darkest parts of the shadows are. You don't want to overdo it with black because it can ruin a painting. So here I'm just using it wherever is the darkest points that I need to. Next we'll go back to our finished dried painting of the sky. Just make sure that you draw around the CD again so you've got a clear shape, and you cut that out really neat, making sure it's as smooth as possible, turning the paper as you cut. Then you take your painting and you align the clouds to where they should be on the painting, and before you do that we will also paint in the pupil. The pupil of the eye is the black part. Now this must be right bang on in the centre. Try to get a nice neat shape. You could use the end of a toothpaste or something else that you've got at home that is perfectly round. Once that's done, place the iris of the eye over the top of your painting. You will notice that you need to actually trim down the top slightly because the top of the lid needs to appear as if it is over the iris. When you're happy with the placement, take a glue stick, apply liberally some glue to the painting, and then stick down the actual iris of the eye. Once stuck down, you can always apply some touch-ups, as I'm doing here with some darker brown to give more shadow.